The fluorescent lights flickered above him as Jake sat alone in the quiet lobby of the old hotel. Outside, rain drummed against the windows, creating a rhythm that matched the thumping of his heart. He had been waiting for hours, cradling an uneaten sandwich in his hands. Each minute that passed felt like a tiny eternity, stretching doubt into something heavy in his chest. He glanced at the muted television mounted high in the corner. The screen was filled with news anchors reporting breaking stories. Jake hadn't paid attention at first, too wrapped up in his own thoughts. But now his curiosity piqued. He turned slightly, leaning in so he could catch what was happening. The sound of the rain faded as the anchors' voices became sharper, clearer. They spoke hurriedly and Jake felt a chill run through him. Suddenly, the screen flashed a familiar face. It was him. His stomach dropped as the news anchor's voice filled the room, wrapping around him like a thick fog. Panic coursed through Jake's veins. Scandal. What was this about? He leaned closer, trying to comprehend what they were saying. It felt surreal. He was just a regular guy, living his simple life, working at the pharmacy down the street. How could his name possibly be on the news? As the news clip rolled, his heart raced faster. The anchor continued, detailing a story filled with accusations, rumors, and twists he could never have imagined. Suddenly, his entire life felt like it was unspooling right in front of him, like a movie he never wanted to be a part of. They say you never see it coming, Jake thought, panic settling in. Just yesterday, he had been enjoying a quiet lunch with his friend Sarah, laughing over inside jokes and sharing dreams for the future. Now here he was, a ghost in his own life, watching every detail of his world explode on the screen. The anchors kept talking, their voices blurring together as the world around him faded. Images flashed, blurred photos, blurry faces, snippets of conversations. Jake's breath quickened. Friends of friends spoke to the camera, sharing their takes on who he was or who they thought he was. And all the while, he sat there, his heart pounding like a drum, the room growing colder with every moment. He could feel the eyes of others in the lobby, even though he hadn't looked around. People were starting to notice him. This wasn't just news, it was an event. They were watching him, waiting to see how he would react. He was becoming part of the spectacle, and he hadn't even done anything. His throat went dry as the anchor proclaimed further allegations. The words clawed at him, turning his stomach in knots. Misconduct, what did they know? He hadn't even left the hotel that day. Memories rushed back like a tidal wave. The moment he had heard the knock on his door, the calm before the storm. A couple of strangers had shown up, armed with questions. They had come to ask about his job, his life, and then it all spiraled. He had felt helpless, cornered like a lion trapped in a cage, surrounded by hunters. Jake glanced at the sandwich in his hand, suddenly disgusted with the thought of eating. How could he focus on food when his whole life was disassembling right in front of him? He stood up, pacing in small, tight circles, feeling the weight of fear coiling tightly around him. He wanted to scream, to run, to make sense of this madness. But standing there frozen, he realized he had no control over any of it. That realization sank deeper into him, wrapping tighter around his chest. His mind raced as he recalled conversations with colleagues. They had been discussing the growing tension in the community, the gossip swirling like smoke. But he had never anticipated it would land on him. He had always been careful, worked hard to follow the rules, to stay below the radar. And yet, in the blink of an eye, he was thrust into a spotlight that felt blinding and cruel. Desperately, he needed to find a way to explain himself. But the room felt suffocating, and people began to shuffle and whisper. He could hear fragments of their conversations, little pieces that cut like shards of glass. Can you believe it? Thoughts tangled in his head as his knees threatened to buckle. He needed to escape. Shoving his sandwich into his pocket, he walked toward the glass doors, unable to shake the urgent need to distance himself from the chaos. As he passed, he caught snippets of more news about him. Words that twisted and distorted into accusations he never saw coming. Just outside, the rain poured harder. It washed over him, the cold drops a brief relief from the scorching heat of shame building inside him. Jake stood under the awning, staring out at the street, his mind racing. He had to go home, but would he still be safe there? Would the place where he had made countless memories turn into a point of accusation? A man hurried past him, clearly in a rush. He glanced back at Jake, uncertainty flickering in his eyes before shuffling onward. It didn't take much to realize what the conversation was outside, how far-reaching gossip could be. The thought sent another wave of panic rolling through him. He turned back toward the hotel, feeling torn between the desire to confront the new reality and the instinct to hide away. He moved back inside and found a quiet corner. Even now, the television continued to loop with reports about him. It felt as if everyone in the world was waiting eagerly for him to crack. Jake had always prided himself on being approachable, a friendly face in the crowd. Suddenly, he felt like he was nothing, just a name, a headline. The fear knotted in his stomach tightened until he felt like he was spiraling. Was this how quickly things could change? Wasn't life about routine and warmth? How did one mistake or a misunderstanding become the foundation of a person's character? He thought about Sarah. She would call him, wouldn't she? Or would she believe the rumors swirling around him? It became a cycle, questions piling upon questions. He sank into an old, worn chair in the corner, burying his face in his hands. He had to think. All he needed was to gather his bearings and then everything would be fine, right? But how could he fight against something so large, so public and all-consuming? How could he even begin to set the record straight when the world around him was so eager to vilify? He took a deep breath, trying to force clarity into his swirling thoughts. Perhaps these stories were exaggerated. Perhaps he would wake up tomorrow to find the truth had a chance to shine through the darkness. And yet, the self-doubt snaked its way back in. Who was he really against this narrative that painted him as something he wasn't? Through the fog, he felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe if he talked to someone, things could change. There had to be a way to communicate through the noise and chaos, a way to pull back the curtains. The truth still mattered, didn't it? He no longer wanted to be a passive participant in this chaos. Jake forced himself to focus on that thought. He checked his phone, shaking hands, fumbling with the screen. The messages and notifications were cascading in, some from coworkers, others from old friends, all seeking answers, all looking to piece together a story that truth had begun fraying at the edges. Then his thoughts turned back to his family. He thought of his brother, the one true ally he had to wrestle with all this. He took a moment to consider what his brother would say. He would tell him the truth mattered, that honesty cuts through the noise. And somehow Jake found himself rising from that chair. He couldn't hide from this, he had to face it, even if it felt like walking into a lion's den. He stepped closer to the TV, the anchors still murmuring as if it were a somber event instead of his life. With the weight of uncertainty still heavy, he finally took a breath. Maybe he didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he realized he wasn't just going to sit silently and let the world dictate who he was. The flickering screen no longer felt like a window to his downfall. It became a call to action, a chance to reclaim his story, one truth at a time. Jake sat on the edge of his chair in the dimly lit lobby, the soft hum of the overhead lights barely cutting through the thick tension in the air. Outside, relentless rain poured down, turning the world into a blur of gray. He was supposed to be having a quiet day, maybe catching up on his reading, but the events that had led him to this moment loomed large in his mind. He watched people come and go, their faces flickering with distraction as they scrolled through their phones. Jake's gaze, however, fixated on the flickering television in the corner. It felt like the eye of a storm as the channels flipped through mundane shows and advertisements, until suddenly it zeroed in on breaking news. His heart raced as the realization hit him. This was a moment he could never escape. The news anchor's voice cut through the comm like a knife, sharp and unforgiving. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Jake's breath caught in his throat, and he leaned closer, as if physically drawing himself into a story that had already begun to derail. Have you ever had that feeling like time froze, yet everything around you becomes hyperreal? That was Jake's reality as he watched his life unravel in a matter of seconds. The screen displayed images of his face, plastered across headlines, alongside bold letters screaming accusations. The words felt like daggers, each one digging deeper, twisting into something dark and painful. Memories rushed back like a tidal wave. Just 2 days ago, he had enjoyed a simple dinner with friends, laughing and sharing stories about their lives. Jake had thought he was safe in that cocoon of familiarity, oblivious to the storm brewing just outside. Now the situation had taken a sharp turn. Fishbowl-like scrutiny replaced his freedom, and the weight of uncertainty pressed down on him. His phone buzzed in his pocket, but he couldn't bring himself to look. The news had already spread beyond his control, and now he faced the daunting reality of what that meant. He could feel the gaze of passers-by shifting toward him, curiosity mingling with judgment. He was the centerpiece of a narrative he never wanted to be part of, a character in a story being told without his consent. He imagined them whispering, their eyes darting toward him. Each glance felt heavier than the last, pressing against his chest like a mounting weight. It was one thing to face accusations behind closed doors, but this was public, a spectacle for the world to consume. Jake shut his eyes momentarily as the anchor continued to describe details he didn't want to hear. Each word felt like a chain wrapping around him, pulling tighter, leaving him breathless. A life built brick by brick was suddenly reduced to a fragile structure that teetered on the edge of collapse. He opened his eyes and stared blankly at the screen. Questions whirled through his mind like a tempest. How had this happened? Who had he upset? The uncertainty gnawed at him, a relentless beast clawing at his composure. He thought back to conversations he'd had recently. A colleague had mentioned whispers in the air, concerns about their workplace. Back then he had brushed it off, but now those words echoed ominously. The sharp call yanked him from his spiraling thoughts. It was Sarah, his closest friend, rushing toward him with worry etched across her face. Her hair was damp from the rain, droplets clinging to the ends as she reached him, a mixture of sympathy and urgency. I just saw the news. He could only nod, though an answer seemed inadequate. Jake, we need to figure this out. As she spoke, the anchor's voice faded back into the background, but the words still echoed in his ears, claims of misconduct like a shadow haunting every moment. Sarah grabbed his arm. Come on, we need to talk. Jake felt an instinctual urge to flee or run away from the stares and whispers, but he knew deep down that staying silent would only fuel the fire. He rose slowly from the chair, the heaviness of uncertainty weighing down each step. They moved toward the small cafe tucked in a corner of the lobby, a small pocket of privacy amid the chaos. Sitting across from each other, he watched as she poured herself a cup of coffee, her hands trembling slightly. "I can't believe this is happening," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "But you need to stay strong." He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "I didn't do anything wrong, Sarah." The words barely escaped his lips, a whisper of disbelief that rang hollow. This was his reality, now accused, scrutinized, judged. "That's what we need to prove," she said, her voice steady like a lighthouse amidst the stormy sea of his thoughts. But how? How could he unravel a narrative that had already taken hold? As the rain pounded against the window, Jake could hear the patter echoing his anxiety. It felt like the world outside mirrored his own turmoil, chaos swirling in rhythm with his heartbeat. He asked, vulnerability creeping into his voice. "Then we give them reasons to," Sarah replied firmly, fixing him with a look that ignited something inside him, determination. "You know your truth, but sharing would mean going back into the storm, where journalists lurked in the shadows, eager for any morsel of gossip." They turned his life into a headline. The very thought sent chills down his spine. He suggested, realizing how he sounded, how tempting it was to retreat. "No," Sarah countered, her voice unwavering. "Hiding won't make it go away, it'll just fester." Confrontation felt like walking a tightrope. Every step forward was an unsteady gamble, and the ground beneath him was still shifting. But the idea of standing still, of allowing this story to sweep him away without a fight, made adrenaline surge through him. The screen still buzzed in the background, and a fresh report began to play. Jake clenched his fists, feeling anger build inside him. It was like being struck by lightning. An image flashed in his mind. He could be extinguished in a blink, forgotten like yesterday's news. A plan began to take shape. It was vague at first, but he felt the flickers of courage within him. "Okay," he said, raising his voice slightly. "Let's do it." Sarah tilted her head, a hint of surprise crossing her features. "Just like that," he confirmed, determination hardening his resolve. With every beat of his heart, he could feel the momentum shifting. No longer just a spectator in his own life, he was reclaiming his narrative. Maybe it would take time, maybe there would be pain, but the truth would eventually rise like steam from the asphalt after a rainstorm, delicate, yet undeniable. They left the cafe together, and the rain had become a background soundtrack, less ominous now. As they approached the lobby exit, Jake felt a mix of fear and anticipation. He knew he would have to confront a lot, friends, family, and perhaps even strangers, but there was also a sense of freedom in knowing he was ready. As they reached the entrance, he spotted a camera crew setting up outside. Anxiety bubbled up again, but he steeled himself. This was it. This was the moment. Turning to Sarah, he held her gaze, feeling her confidence wrap around him like armor. One of the reporters looked up and caught Jake's eye. A flicker of recognition passed between them, and Jake felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. Everything he had feared loomed ahead, but he also felt a spark of liberation. "I'm ready," he whispered to Sarah, and she nodded, heartened. Jake stepped outside. The rain had eased, but the gray clouds hung heavy above. The cameras focused in on him, the whir of the world around him fading for just a breath. He summoned every ounce of clarity he had, aware that the truth had always been his greatest ally. "I'm Jake Morrison," he began, his voice carrying despite the tension in the air. As he spoke, the whispers faded into the background, replaced by the sound of his own thoughts aligning. This was his moment to reclaim his story, a moment to stand firm in his truth and face the world head-on. The rest would follow. The truth always has a way of surfacing. And just like that, the pieces began to fit. The storm was shifting, and from the chaos he could see the possibility of clarity. Standing tall amid the uncertainty, he no longer felt like a victim of the narrative. Instead, a new chapter was beginning, and it was unlike anything he had ever imagined. Jake sat in the corner of the hotel lobby, a tentative figure amid the bustle of travelers coming and going. The soft murmur of conversations mixed with the breeze of the air conditioning above, creating a mask of normalcy. But Jake felt anything but normal. He had come to the lobby for a moment of peace, a brief escape from the whirlwind of his life. Instead, he found himself waiting in suffocating silence, his heart pounding in anticipation of the unknown. His eyes drifted to the flickering television mounted high on the wall. The screen pulsed with vibrant colors, encapsulating the type of news that normally revolved around celebrity gossip or local events. But today, something else was happening. The news anchor's voice broke through the static, smooth but urgent. The words struck him like a thunderbolt. Jake's breath caught in his throat. Suddenly, the room around him blurred, the faces of strangers transformed into shadows. The anchor continued, her tone both serious and sensational. For a moment, Jake felt like he was swimming in a vast ocean, while the ground beneath him shifted violently, threatening to pull him under. He had heard whispers of unease in his small town, but he had never imagined that his name would be at the center of something so explosive. How could this happen? How could he be implicated in something so grim when he felt like just a regular guy? Memories cascaded over him like a waterfall. He had stood in front of the mirror that morning, brushing his teeth, oblivious to the storm brewing just beyond the surface. He recalled the laughter shared with friends, the mundane chatter about work, plans for the weekend. Now he saw a different reflection, a man staring back from the depths of uncertainty. Panicked thoughts raced through his mind. What did they know? Who was speaking? He grabbed the edge of the chair, grounding himself as reality crept in. It had to be a misunderstanding, he thought frantically. He couldn't be involved in something so nefarious. He hadn't done anything wrong. He stood up abruptly, the chair screeching against the floor, drawing the attention of nearby strangers. They turned, eyes wide, eyebrows raised, as though they were waiting for him to react. The gravity of his situation hung in the air like thick smoke, suffocating and inescapable. Goosebumps prickled at his skin as he sensed their curiosity morphing into judgment. What were they thinking? Did they already believe the worst? The anchor's voice echoed in his mind inevitably. It felt like the world would refuse to see him as just Jake Morrison, the friendly pharmacist. Instead, he was quickly becoming the criminal in the eyes of everyone in his life. He stood in the lobby, the rain pelting hard against the windows, the sound mimicking the pounding of his heart. The steady roar was a reminder that life continued, oblivious to his silent chaos. Desperation coursed through him. He wanted to scream to clear the air, but the words stuck in his throat like a thick fog. Silence enveloped him, heavy and oppressive. His phone buzzed in his pocket, breaking through the clamor of thoughts. He hesitated to look, fearing the messages piling up would only amplify his anxiety. Curiosity won out and he pulled it out, the screen lighting up with notifications from coworkers and friends. Each message felt like a tiny dagger, each inquiry a painful reminder of the reality he was drowning in. With grim determination, he tapped the screen, scrolling through the inquiries. Anxiety and panic intermingled as he read each one. The flood of concern stung more than it comforted. How could they be concerned when the world was attributing something vile to his name? Then another ding, a text from Sarah, his closest friend. "I'm here, I just saw the news." His heart raced. He could almost hear her voice in his mind, steady and sure, urging him to confront the chaos. In a moment of clarity, he knew he needed to talk to her. He didn't want to be trapped in his own thoughts any longer. He turned toward the lobby entrance, pushing through the crowd of onlookers, each gaze feeling like ice on his skin. Outside, the rain had created a slick sheen on the pavement, fireworks in autumn colors reflecting against the droplets. He spotted Sarah across the street, her silhouette striking against the gray backdrop. She rushed toward him, her expression a mix of concern and bewilderment. She called, urgency in her voice. "I'm so sorry." His voice was barely a whisper, a thin thread of resolve. Without thinking, they found a secluded spot under an awning, the rain drumming against the surface above them. "I don't know what to do," he admitted, running a hand through his damp hair. Sarah's eyes softened, determination flickering behind them. "We will figure this out. You know you didn't do anything wrong." The word hung in the air like a challenge. "How do I confront the whole town?" "You begin with the truth, Jake," she stated firmly, a spark of fire in her makeup. "You owe it to yourself to tell your side." Thoughts stormed through his brain, swirling like leaves caught in a gust of wind. What would it take to set things right? What would he even say? But deep beneath his fear, he felt the stirrings of anger that people could so easily believe the worst of him. Sure, he was an everyday guy, unassuming, quiet, but did that make him a target? How did rumors take form so easily, so swiftly? Did people crave drama that badly? "I have to say something," he finally said, his voice decisively stronger. "Yes, you do, but we have to plan first," Sarah said, her energy renewing his own. They quickly huddled together, brainstorming ideas, mapping out the types of statements he could make. "A public statement," Jake finally suggested, adrenaline now surging through him. "I'll put out my side of the story." Sarah's eyebrows shot up, impressed. "That's bold, but it could work. They need to hear from you, not some abstract news report." As they left the safety of the awning, the rain had dulled to a gentle patter. Jake felt as if he were stepping into the storm rather than away from it, a metaphorical plunge straight into the roaring chaos ahead. The streets, once familiar, now felt foreign, swirling with attention and whispers. They found themselves at a small diner nearby. Its neon sign glowed through the drizzle like a beacon. Inside, the warm light wrapped around them as they slid into a booth. The weight of the world outside couldn't penetrate this cocoon. Sarah had her phone out, typing quickly. "I'll help you draft your statement." Jake took a moment, inhaling deeply. Despite the fear still perched on his shoulder, he felt empowered. For too long, he had allowed himself to be swept away by silence, by the weight of other people's opinions. "Okay," he said, his voice carrying a newfound strength. "Let's do this." As words spilled across the screen, each letter became a piece of armor he was putting on. "I am Jake Morrison," he began, typing vigorously, "and I stand here to clarify the rumors surrounding me." The urgency surged through both of them, with Sarah's fingers moving quickly over the keys, crafting a statement that balanced his frustration and vulnerability. "Accused of something I didn't do is a weight no one should bear," he added, feeling the truth of his words resonate deep within. Every word felt like a step toward reclaiming his narrative. This was not just about a single event, it was a confrontation of silence and fear, a rallying cry to step out from the shadows. As they drafted the final words, excitement built within Jake. The once familiar diner now felt ripe with potential, as if this very moment would mark a turning point in his life. No longer would he sit quietly while the world dictated his story, he would fight back. The moment came when they hit send and the statement went out, shared across social media and news outlets. It was strange how surreal the experience felt. It was as if he had just jumped out of a plane, hands wide open, embracing the fall. Sarah asked, leaning back in her seat, her face a mixture of apprehension and hope. And wait they did. Minutes felt like hours as their hearts raced with uncertainty. He could feel a tidal wave of emotions, fear mixed with determination, crashing like waves against the shore of his mind. Questions swirled. Would people believe him? Would this tell the truth, or would it only add more fuel to the fire? But as time passed, the rain began to diminish, and the murmur of the diner seemed to fade into the background. Outside, a new energy buzzed through the streets. Jake grabbed his phone again, scrolling through the notifications. His heart sped up. People are responding. As the world began to shift back into focus, Jake felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The journey had begun, and with every heartbeat, he was carving a path to reclaim not just his truth, but also his life. It was a small step in a larger battle, but it was everything. With the storm still presiding outside, Jake glanced at Sarah, who had been the steady hand during this storm. "Thank you for not letting me stay silent," he said, sincerity pouring from him. "We're in this together," she replied, giving his hand a reassuring squeeze. In that moment, under the flickering neon lights of the diner, Jake understood something crucial. Silence might be easy, but courage demands speaking out. No matter how chaotic life felt, when faced with the unknown, he would stand up for himself, creating a truth no one could take away. The hard rain turned into a light drizzle, each droplet steady and constant, much like his newfound resolve. The world could throw its challenges his way, but Jake Morrison was ready to meet them head-on, one word at a time. Jake sat in the corner of the hotel lobby, an uneasy silence surrounding him. A faint hum from the air conditioning filled the void, mingling with the sound of raindrops tapping on the glass. He was there for a mini getaway, a brief escape from the grind of daily life, but now he felt a weight of tension settling over him like a dark cloud. As he stared into the lobby, watching strangers come and go, his gaze drifted toward the television mounted high on the wall. The screen flickered with typical news stories, nothing of concern, until suddenly the anchor's voice shifted. Jake's heart raced, pounding violently against his ribs. The words hit him like a punch to the gut, and he leaned in closer, straining to catch every syllable. Panic washed over him in waves. What had he done? How could his name be associated with something so serious? Just that morning, he had woken up with hopes, plans for the day, a stroll around the city, maybe even an afternoon coffee with a friend. Now those plans evaporated like mist in the sun. Memories flooded back, vivid and sharp. He remembered chatting with colleagues at the pharmacy, laughing over shared stories. Just yesterday, he was a trusted employee, known for his kindness and reliability. Now he was a suspect in everyone's eyes. As the news continued, images of him flashed on the screen, blurred but recognizable. Faces he didn't want to see began to populate his mind. Friends, family, they would be watching, they would be questioning. The anchor spoke with a tone that was both dramatic and slightly gleeful, as if relishing the unfolding scandal. Jake could feel the heat rising in his cheeks. Embarrassment flooded him. He could only stand still, feeling the weight of their gaze even from a distance. He wrapped his arms around his middle instinctively, holding himself together as if he might fall apart. A million thoughts raced behind his eyes, each darker than the last. Just then his phone buzzed violently in his pocket. He hesitated for a moment before pulling it out, heart racing at the sight of numerous notifications. They were from friends, coworkers, and acquaintances, words of concern spilling out. He felt the world around him freeze. The laughter he had shared with those same friends only a day or two ago seemed so far away now, like a distant memory painted over in shadow. He could practically hear them, those hushed tones, whispers of disbelief. The fear of being misunderstood wrapped around him like a straitjacket. He needed to move. Panic clawed at him as he stumbled silently out of the lobby. He stepped into the rain, each droplet striking him like a winter tap. However surreal, the rain somehow comforted him. It offered a momentary release from the suffocating tension. About 10 feet away, he spotted a familiar face, Sarah, his closest friend, sitting under the awning of a cafe, eyebrows knitted together in concern. She rushed toward him, the raindrops dancing around her like reluctant, loyal subjects. "Jake," her voice was a blend of disbelief and worry. "What's happening?" He tried to find the words, felt the weight of that question pressing against his chest. It felt like trying to lift a boulder. "I don't know, Sarah." Her eyes softened, a mixture of determination and compassion. The thought caught him off guard. Should he speak out? For the first time, he thought about the weight of silence. Too often, silence had wrapped around him, masking his truth. "They don't know you," she insisted, pulling him toward the cafe like a lifeline in a tempest. "They need to hear the real you." As they settled into a booth inside, the walls felt like sanctuary. The warmth of the cafe contrasted with the storm outside, but Jake could feel the intensity of emotions swirling inside him. The news was like a cacophony in the back of his mind, drowning out every rational thought. Sarah took her phone out, her fingers flying over the screen. "Let's write a statement." Jake nodded, feeling the spark of determination flicker to life within him. He was tired of being defined by other people's narratives. "Okay," he said, voice firming as he leaned in. With each word they typed, he poured his heart into the message, drafting it as if crafting a lifeboat in a stormy sea. "I am not what they say," he typed. "This is not who I am. I've always believed in community, trust, kindness." The words felt like soaring kites, lifting him above the clouds of confusion. As they wrote, Jake felt the anger and fear begin to dissipate, replaced by a sense of empowerment. Each line reminded him of who he truly was, not the warped version splashed across the news. With her support, Jake drafted a heartfelt statement. When they finished, it felt like an anchor in a turbulent world. They agreed he would release it through social media, giving people a chance to see his truth. Nervously, he hit send, the digital message sending ripples into the wider world. They sat in silence, anticipation buzzing around them like electrical energy. It was done, but what followed? Would people believe him? Would they read beyond the headlines? Minutes passed, and the cafe buzzed around them, lights flickering softly like glimmers of hope. And then his phone buzzed again, this time louder and more insistent. Notifications poured in, vibrating against the table like thunder. Flashed one message. "You're not alone," scrolled another. It was as if a dam had broken. Friends and strangers alike were rallying around him, urging him forward. Hope surged through his veins, warming him against the chill that had begun to creep in. The rain outside had mellowed, transforming into a gentle mist, a sign of renewal and clarity. Jake felt lighter, as if a tremendous weight had shifted from his shoulders. "Look at this," he showed Sarah, eyes wide with disbelief. Sarah smiled, a relief washing over her face. "See, you're not alone in this." But even as he reveled in the warmth of support, doubt still nibbled at the corners of his mind. What did the public think? Sitting in that booth, he realized he was still at the mercy of perception, forever entwined in the threads others wove about him. "I just want the truth to shine through," he sighed, feeling the remnants of worry. Truth has a funny way of pushing through distractions. She reached out, her hand covering his. "And more importantly, it matters to you." A deep breath filled his lungs, the weight of her words anchoring. Perhaps Sarah was right. The truth wouldn't just rise, it would be his weapon against the storm of chaos. Their conversation flowed into the evening, planning next steps as the rain slowly subsided outside. With each moment they shared, his resolve grew. No matter how much noise swirled around him, he wouldn't allow it to shape who he was. He would emerge as Jake Morrison, friend, pharmacist, and most importantly, a man who stood for his truth. And so the night wore on, their small cafe sacred against the backdrop of uncertainty. Conversation shifted from panic to strategy, and as the darkness settled outside, a sense of calm enveloped him. The next day arrived. The world was still shrouded in gray, but hope had imperceptibly crept in through the cracks. Jake resolved to continue speaking out, sharing his story, and helping others navigate their own battles. As news stories unfolded, declaring different perspectives on the allegations, he chose to share his experience authentically through social media, fostering dialogue, empathy, and understanding. In every post, he had a choice. He could spiral deeper into despair or choose to advocate for clarity. His voice resonated with surprising strength, standing in contrast against the stormy narratives. People began to respond, not just with support, but with stories of their own struggles. He was no longer alone. He had found solace in the fabric of community that stretched far beyond individual turmoil. In the weeks that followed, the initial scandal took on a life of its own, creating waves throughout town. But Jake learned to surf on those waves, rising above as he engaged with others who believed in the importance of truth. Conversations that started with shame slowly turned into discussions of recovery and resilience. As he looked back on those moments of waiting in silence, he realized they were a pivotal point, an opportunity to speak out and rise. Every head turned his way, every whisper only fueled his determination to redefine the narrative. Time marched forward, and while headlines may have waxed and waned, his resolve remained steadfast. He was no longer that hesitant figure waiting in the corner of the lobby. He had transformed into a voice, an advocate, a beacon of hope. Jake learned that silence can sometimes be a double-edged sword. It can bind you, but when intertwined with courage, it can also cut free the chains of misunderstanding. The world could be loud and tumultuous, but within that noise, he would continue to shout desperately for the truth. And above all, he learned the beauty of connection, of reaching out and embracing those around him. Together, they would face whatever storms lay ahead, united by the unwavering belief that truth, in all its forms, would shine through the darkest of times. Jake sat alone in the dimly lit corner of the hotel lobby, an air of trepidation hanging heavy around him. He glanced at the clock on the wall, its incessant ticking matching the rhythm of his heart, each tick echoing like a countdown. He hadn't planned to be here. The intention was to escape the noise of daily life, the mundane routines that wrapped around him like a heavy blanket. But instead, he found himself waiting in silence, feeling the weight of anxiety creeping in. The lobby was relatively empty, save for a couple of tourists chatting quietly in a booth and a family with restless children playing nearby. The soft chatter, the rustle of newspapers, it all faded into a distant hum as Jake's focus flickered to the television mounted high on the wall. The screen flickered between advertisements and mundane news, and then it changed. A breaking news banner sliced across the screen. Jake's stomach dropped as the anchor's voice pierced through the quiet. His breath hitched as the words penetrated the fabric of his reality. Implicated, how could this be? Panic surged in him like a tidal wave. He leaned closer, straining to catch every word, every detail that could shed light on this terrifying situation. As the camera zoomed in, he could almost feel the weight of those lenses bearing down on him, as if they were pointing right at his chest. Authorities are investigating claims of misconduct, the anchor continued without a shred of empathy. Each word felt like a dagger twisting deeper into the marrow of his being. Jake's heart raced, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He wasn't just a witness to this chaos, he was at the center of it. Memories flooded back to him, conversations with friends at the pharmacy where he worked, laughter shared over coffee breaks, ordinary moments that painted a picture of normalcy. Just yesterday, he'd been planning a weekend trip with his best friend, Sarah, to go hiking to escape the grind. But now those plans felt as distant as a fading star. As images of him flashed on the screen, Jake suppressed a shiver. Who were these people speaking on camera, friends of friends? He could hear them now, their voices sharp and biting, dissecting his life for everyone to see. He seemed so normal, one said, shaking their head in disbelief. Jake's world felt like it had turned upside down. He was just Jake Morrison, a small-town guy known for his kindness and reliability. How had he suddenly morphed into a suspect, a man under the microscope for something he didn't even comprehend? The walls around him seemed to close in. People in the lobby began to cast sidelong glances as they absorbed the news, their interest shifting from strangers to the headline that invaded his life. His phone buzzed violently in his pocket, almost echoing his thoughts. Each vibration felt like an electric shock, stirring a growing sense of dread. Slowly, with shaking hands, he pulled it out. No sooner had he unlocked it than a wave of messages flooded in. He felt a rising tide of humiliation wash over him. He wanted to scream, wanted to shove the phone back into his pocket and disappear. The whispers in the air were palpable. This was not just an accusation, it was a spectacle. He had become a headline. He needed to move. Unthinking, he bolted from the lobby, the heavy rain outside greeting him like a relentless wave. Each droplet felt like a cold slap against his skin, the sensation distracting him from the spiraling chaos in his mind. Frantic thoughts whirled. What if this was all a mistake? What if it went too far to fix? As he passed a cafe across the street, a familiar face caught his eye. Sarah was waiting under an awning, her expression a mix of concern and urgency. She rushed toward him, dodging the rain with practiced grace. She called, her voice cutting through the sound of falling drops. I saw the news. He shook his head, words caught in his throat. I can't believe it. They're saying I did something. Her presence felt like a lifeline amidst the torrent of uncertainty. Calm down. She wrapped an arm around his shoulders, leading him to the cafe. Inside, warm light enveloped them, contrast to the chaos swirling just beyond the door. Sitting across from each other at a small table, Jake couldn't help but feel exposed. He breathed, feeling the weight of the world upon his shoulders. We're going to set the record straight, Sarah replied firmly. You can't let this define you. The question hung in the air, a bitter reminder of his helplessness. No, they haven't, not yet, Sarah countered, her eyes steady. You have to be proactive, use social media. A flicker of determination ignited within him at her words. For too long, he'd allowed fear to wrap around him, but standing there with Sarah, he felt a shift. Perhaps silence would only encourage deception, and he couldn't afford that any longer. Okay, he said, voice gaining strength. They quickly decided to craft a statement, one that conveyed his truth, not only to those who knew him well, but also to the larger community scanning for answers. Each word became a beacon of hope as Jake poured his feelings into the message. I am Jake Morrison, and I stand here today to clarify the rumors surrounding me. As they typed out his story together, the storm outside began to lessen, replaced by a softer patter against the windows. With each keystroke, Jake felt more like himself, a man reclaiming his narrative rather than succumbing to it. He spoke of kindness, of being a good neighbor, and of the importance of trust. There's so much more to me than these accusations, he typed, his heart racing as he verified each line. When they finished, the message felt like releasing a caged bird. It would fly into the world, painting a clearer picture of who he was. Sarah asked, a mixture of excitement and anxiety reflected in her expression. Determined, he took a deep breath. He hit post, and a sense of clarity settled around him as the darkness began to lift. He envisioned people reading his words, absorbing the truth of who he was. Moments ticked by and the cafe buzzed around them, but Jake was lost in thought. What would happen next? Would they believe him? Just then, a draft of wind ruffled his hair and shook the door. Outside, sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the damp streets, hope appearing amidst despair. His phone buzzed again and his heart raced as he glanced at it. Notifications flooded in, friends expressing solidarity, strangers sharing their own experiences of misunderstanding. The tide was turning, support poured in, sweeping away the lingering doubt. he exclaimed, showing Sarah the flood of messages. People are standing by me. Tears pricked at the corners of his eyes as the emotion surged within him. Each message was a thread of connection, weaving a fabric of possibility. As if sensing the transformative power of community, he felt alive with gratitude. Sarah's face lit up with a smile. See, you're not in this alone. The hours slipped away as they engaged with friends, responding to messages and crafting a dialogue around what had happened. Jake embraced the opportunity to not just stand up for himself, but also to foster connection. He began to realize the storm had galvanized something within him. Eventually, as the sun began to set, their energy shifted. You've done it, Jake. Whether the news turns in your favor or not, you've taken a stand, Sarah said quietly. Thank you, he replied, his voice choked with emotion. The cafe's atmosphere hummed with chatter and warmth, but Jake felt as if he were in a new world where shadows of misunderstanding dissolved in light. Weeks passed and the story began its slow fade from the news cycle, though it left an uncomfortable footprint behind. Jake continued to use his platform to engage in conversations about trust, accountability, and the power of community. He began organizing meetups, gatherings to support others who had faced similar challenges. Slowly, the narrative shifted from scandal to recovery, and the spotlight that once felt suffocating now served as a platform for hope. Jake found strength not merely in himself, but also in the years of relationships he had nurtured, the community that had rallied around him. Time continued to flow, seasons turning from the sharp edges of winter to the promise of spring. New headlines filled the air with chatter, much more benign than before. Life began its slow crawl back to normal, yet Jake carried his experience as an indelible mark, one that reminded him of resilience. As he sat in his favorite park, a bustling gathering spot filled with laughter and chatter, he crossed paths with a couple of old friends. They beamed at him, shining with warmth. Hey Jake, we just wanted to tell you how much your words meant to us. You've inspired us with your story, one of them said, sincerity lighting their eyes. He felt warmth bloom in his chest as he smiled back. Thank you. And just like that, he realized silence had transformed nothing more than a fleeting moment in time. In reclaiming his voice, he had become an advocate, not just for himself, but for others who had felt the same sting of accusation and doubt. Finally, standing tall, arms open wide under the sun, Jake understood he had the power to shape his own narrative. No longer defined by whispers or headlines, he was simply Jake. And from that day on, he resolved to speak his truth boldly while continuing to invite others to join him, weaving a tapestry filled with stories of hope, resilience, and the beauty of understanding. Life would always pose challenges, but Jake now stood ready, not just waiting in silence, but living out loud, stronger and more certain than ever before. Jake sat in the hotel lobby, a tense coil of nerves, barely visible amid the busy rush of travelers. The soft clicking of heels on tiled floors and the distant chime of the front desk created a familiar symphony, but it felt like static in his ears. Outside, the sky threatened rain, a fitting backdrop to the storm brewing within him. He had come here for a brief escape from his hectic life, a chance to rearrange his thoughts and focus on his future. But now, as he sipped his lukewarm coffee, he could feel an unsettling anxiety creeping in, tightening its grasp around his chest. What was he doing here? Shouldn't he be somewhere meaningful, tackling the uncertainty rattling through his mind? His thoughts spiraled until they landed on the television mounted high in the corner. The screen flickered between local updates and feature stories, a comforting noise that blended into the background. That was until a prominent banner scrolled across the bottom, punctuating the silence like a clap of thunder. Time stopped. Jake's stomach dropped like a stone, and a chill cascaded down his spine. Did they just say his name? His heart raced, each beat loud in his ears as the anchor continued, the words slicing through the silence. Panic surged within him as if he had been forcibly plunged into icy waters. The news anchor smiled, their demeanor sickeningly cheerful as they reported the growing allegations. Jake felt utterly exposed, reality folding in on itself. He was no longer just a face in the crowd, he was now the center of a storm. He leaned closer to the screen, as if hoping to find some clarity among the chaos. Images of him flashed, onlookers' comments streaming across the screen like a tide pulling him under. The words hung heavy in the air, weighing him down. Jake's memories mashed together, faces and voices swirling like a tempest. He thought of everyday interactions, colleagues laughing with him, friends valuing his honesty. How had all that trust evaporated into thin air? In an instant, he felt the ground beneath him shift. Girls giggled nearby, voices rising above the lobby's cacophony, and for a moment their laughter cut through his dread, but just like that, crumbled. He was no longer part of that world. He craved silence, a yearning to retreat, to hide from the eyes of strangers, the weight of allegations hanging over his head like an invisible noose. Jake pulled his phone from his pocket. A torrent of notifications awaited him. His heart sank as he opened it, friends, coworkers, acquaintances reaching out with worried texts. Each message struck him like a hammer, resonating with the reality that people were talking about him, whispers turning into an echo chamber of doubt and suspicion. His hands shook as he dropped the phone back into his pocket. The world around him felt suffocating. He needed out. He stood up abruptly, grim determination taking hold. He pushed through the lobby doors into the rain, which tapped insistently on the pavement like 1,000 watchful eyes. The cool air hit him sharply, a brief reprieve from the chaos swirling in his mind. And then he saw her, Sarah, his best friend, waiting under an awning across the street. She looked concerned, her eyes wide with disbelief. She shouted, rushing toward him, her umbrella barely making it through the downpour. "I just saw the news." He shook his head, unable to articulate the whirlwind inside him. "I don't know," he managed, his voice cracking. Her expression softened, a blend of understanding and concern washing over her. "We need to get to the bottom of this. We can't let them define who you are." They ducked into a nearby cafe, the door chiming softly behind them. Inside, warmth enveloped them, a refuge from the storm outside. Jake sank into a booth, staring blankly at the table as Sarah pulled out her phone. "You need to be proactive about this," she urged, her voice steady despite the chaos. "You have to control your narrative, Jake." Heart pounding, he looked up at her. "But what can I even say? Not all of them. You need to tell your side," she urged. Panic clawed at him, but beneath it flickered a spark of possibility. Maybe if he put his truth out there, it could drown out the lies. With her encouragement, Jake grasped at that flicker, determination slowly taking root. "Okay," he said, his voice stronger now. They spent the next hour drafting a statement, pouring his emotions into words. "I am Jake Morrison and I stand for truth," he typed, fingers gliding over the screen. "I am not what they are claiming." As the words flowed, the storm outside began to ease, droplets still pattering against the window as Jake felt a weight lifting off his shoulders. Each sentence was a step toward reclaiming his identity. Sarah felt it too. She leaned in, her faith in him bubbling just beneath the surface. The cafe hummed with activity, yet Jake felt cocooned in their own world. The screen lit up with support from mutual friends, offering encouragement and solidarity. But even as hope flickered, doubt lingered. "What if they didn't believe him? Let's make it public," Sarah suggested, eyes alight with determination. Nervously, Jake pulled out his phone, hit post, and watched his statement go live. With that simple act, he set his truth free into the world, a message echoing against the noise of voice among whispers. Seconds felt like hours as the notifications flooded in and they watched in anxious silence. Jake's heart raced at every vibration, anticipation drowning out doubt. Sarah exclaimed, her excitement contagious. "People are responding." Messages of support flooded in faster than he could read them. The community he had fostered reached out in droves, shattering the isolation that had threatened to consume him. With each ping of his phone, a wave of relief washed over him. Hope took root, pushing back against the shadows. "I didn't think it would feel this good," he admitted, a smile breaking through his uncertainty. Sarah grinned, the warmth of their shared experience illuminating the small booth. "See, you're not just a headline, this is who you are." As they continued to engage with the outpouring of support, Jake felt a sense of clarity settle around him. The storm outside had cleared, sunlight streaming through the cafe window, and with it came renewed energy. He wanted to confront the world boldly. He was not just a victim in this narrative. He would become an advocate. Transformation began to unfold. Started sharing more about himself, his journey, challenges, hopes, and dreams, each post peeling back layers and revealing his truth. Engaging with others helped him see that he wasn't alone, that many had faced whispering rumors and struggled with their own battles. Days turned into weeks, and the frenzy of the news finally began to die down. But Jake had changed. He felt something shift within him. He resolved not to let the fear and anxiety control him. Instead, he turned it into a tool for growth. One evening, standing in front of the mirror, he looked at the person staring back. He was ready to embrace the journey ahead. He wasn't going to be bound by the past or by others' perceptions. He would step out into the world vulnerable but unafraid. Then came the day when a community forum planned a discussion. Jake hesitated at first, the fear of stepping into the spotlight creeping in, but then Sarah's voice echoed in his mind, "Be proactive." With a deep breath, he took the stage, the atmosphere buzzing with curiosity. He scanned the room filled with familiar and unfamiliar faces, the weight of their expectations pressing down but also giving him strength. He opened his mouth to speak and the words spilled out. "I'm here today to share my story," he began, the tremor in his voice anchoring him. "This journey has taught me the importance of truth and community." As he shared his experiences, vulnerability enveloped the room like a warm embrace. Each eye was fixed on him, a tapestry of understanding starting to weave its way through shared struggles. He recounted the fear, doubt, and isolation he had faced, but he also spoke of the incredible support he had received. "I realized that when we stand together, we are stronger," he concluded, the audience silent and captivated. "We have the power to redefine our narratives and uplift one another." A wave of applause erupted, echoing through the hall. As he stepped off the stage, Jake felt a rush of exhilaration swell within him. He had taken control, forging a bond with those around him. That night back at the hotel, rain pattered rhythmically against the window, a comforting reminder of what he had overcome. With every droplet, he felt the past washing away and a new dawn rising in its place. The fear that had once consumed him now transformed into a fire of resilience, a beacon of hope for others. Jake knew he would continue to speak out, advocate for those who felt voiceless. He had become not just a participant in his story, but the author crafting a narrative of strength, community, and unwavering faith in the power of truth. As he lay down to sleep, the storm outside faded, and he drifted off, dreaming of the future and the deeper connections yet to come. When morning arrived, it brought with it the promise of new beginnings and the certainty that he would never wait in silence again. He was ready to be loud, unapologetic, and alive, embracing every chapter that lay ahead. Jake sat nervously in the corner of the hotel lobby, the soft hum of conversations drifting around him like a distant melody. With an untouched cup of coffee in front of him, he tried to focus on the solid wood grain of the table, avoiding the chatter and laughter of families reuniting and couples planning their next adventure. However, the atmosphere felt electric, charged with an unshakable tension as he waited for anything to happen. The lobby was a mix of bright lights and muted colors, a waiting room to the outside world. Suddenly, the muted television screen high on the wall flickered, capturing his attention. He had barely glanced at it before, but now it seemed to pulse with urgency. The news anchor's voice broke through the ambient sounds, cutting like a knife. His heart skipped a beat, a bolt of electricity shooting through him. His name, they had just said his name. Panic surged as he leaned closer, bracing himself for the inevitable storm that was about to unfold. Authorities are investigating claims of misconduct, the anchor continued, each word a heavy stone dropping into his gut. Jake's mind raced, a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. What did they mean, misconduct? He had always been a law-abiding citizen, a hardworking pharmacist, a friend, a brother. How could he possibly be involved in a scandal? It felt surreal, like a scene from a movie that had gone horribly wrong. As images of him flashed across the screen, his throat tightened. Friends and family were likely watching, their faces registering shock and disbelief. He's not the kind of person to do that, they would say. But what if they believed the reports? What if they looked at him differently? He was about to spiral when the anchor's voice returned, words spiraling out of control like a runaway train. He felt as if he was being pulled under a powerful wave, unable to breathe as the tide surged around him. It didn't matter that he had little to no idea what the accusations even were. The mere idea of being implicated was enough to drown him in a sea of doubt. He squeezed his eyes shut, desperate to block out the reality flashing before him. Just then, the storm in his pocket began to buzz violently. He reached for his phone, trembling hands fumbling to unlock the screen. A flood of notifications awaited him, dozens of texts from concerned friends and coworkers. Each message was a jagged reminder of the chaos spiraling out of control. He needed to escape, needed to think, to breathe without the pressure of judgment looming over him. Jake shot up from his seat, the chair scraping against the floor, drawing attention from a few startled onlookers. The lobby felt suffocating now, walls closing in around him. He pushed through the glass doors into the pouring rain, the cold droplets hitting his skin like tiny pinpricks. A familiar face caught his eye across the street. Sarah, his best friend, her concern etched deeply across her features. She rushed toward him, oblivious to the rain soaking her jacket. She shouted, her voice breaking through the chaos swirling in his mind. "I just saw the news," he exclaimed, the words spilling out in a rush. "I didn't do anything. How can they say that? Let's get somewhere safe," she urged, guiding him toward a nearby cafe. Inside, the warmth wrapped around them, teetering between comfort and tension. As they settled at a corner table, Jake felt the weight of the world crash down on him. He took a deep breath, trying to steady the whirlwind inside. But the news replayed in his mind, and each word sent tendrils of fear snaking through his thoughts. "I can't believe this is happening," he said, his voice trembling. "What do I even say?" Sarah reached across the table, her hand steady on his. "Listen, Jake, you can't let this define you. You have to tell your side." His mind whirled, grappling with the possibilities. Could he really fight against something already taking root in the public consciousness? But what if no one believes me? Then you fight harder, you don't give up, she replied firmly, determination shining in her eyes. As he glanced outside, watching raindrops race down the window, Jake felt a flicker of resolve ignite deep within him. He had always prided himself on valuing honesty, but here he was, drowning in a narrative that didn't belong to him. He couldn't be a passive spectator in his own life. "Okay," he said, a new calm washing over him. "Let's do it." A wave of courage surged through him. They quickly drafted a statement together, a heartfelt declaration of who he was and what he stood for. Every word he typed felt heavy with emotion, but also empowering. He wrote about his commitment to his community, the relationships he had built over years, and his unwavering integrity. "I am not what they say I am," he typed, feeling each letter resonate inside him. With a deep breath, he was ready. They posted it on social media, broadcasting his truth into the digital ether where it would ripple out to those who wanted to listen. As soon as he hit send, a wave of relief washed over him. It was a step, a barrier against the tide of accusations. The cafe buzzed with life, but for Jake, the world had become a swirling vortex of anticipation. His phone lit up almost immediately with responses, friends voicing support and solidarity, some even sharing stories of their own challenges. With each notification, Jake felt a sense of hope begin to emerge through the suffocating doubt. No longer did he feel like a lone figure drowning in a sea of accusations. He was part of a community, and together they would confront the storm. Sat together, the atmosphere shifted. Laughter floated from a nearby table, and the barista cheerfully called out drink orders. Sarah leaned back, a smile creeping across her face. "See, you're not alone." Jake blinked, unable to suppress the burgeoning smile forming on his lips. "I didn't think." With renewed energy, he started replying to messages, sharing snippets of gratitude, engagement becoming the lifeblood he craved. His voice was finally amplified, no longer muffled by fear and shame. The sun began to set, casting a warm golden hue across the cafe. As the rain subsided outside, Jake felt a shift within himself, a new layer of strength unfurling. He was tired of waiting. He was ready to fight back against the storm that had threatened to consume him. "Let's organize a meeting," Jake suggested suddenly, excitement bubbling in his chest. Sarah asked, her eyes lighting up. "Yeah, so everyone can hear the truth. I want to create a space for dialogue." As they strategized, Jake felt the thrill of possibility. He wasn't just a target of accusations. He was an advocate, a voice rising above the chaos. They spent hours drafting invitations, publicizing the event on social media. He hoped it would not only allow him to share his truth, but also empower others to conquer their battles. The day of the meeting arrived, and Jake stood at the front of the small community center, his heart racing. Chairs filled with familiar faces, friends, colleagues, neighbors, each one buzzing with anticipation. He felt the weight of their gazes, the expectations mingling with hope and trepidation. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward, the room silent in attention. "Thank you all for being here," he started, his voice steady despite the tremor of nerves beneath it. "I know there's been a lot of fear and uncertainty surrounding what's been happening recently." He spoke candidly, recounting the story of the unfolding events, from his shock in the hotel lobby to the surge of support that had come from his friends. He acknowledged the dark feelings that had momentarily consumed him, but also highlighted the incredible power of community in overcoming those moments of doubt. "I am proud of who I am, not just a pharmacist, but a person who values honesty and trust," he continued, watching as heads nodded in solidarity. The room felt alive, every word forming bonds between him and those who listened intently. As he opened the floor for discussion, hands shot up, voices chimed in, and the atmosphere became a supportive dialogue filled with shared experiences and heartfelt encouragement. It was healing for him. In turn, he could even see others find strength in their vulnerability. The evening wrapped with applause and conversations flowing freely. People approached Jake with expressions filled with gratitude, offering words of encouragement, sharing their own experiences with self-doubt and misunderstanding. Instead of feeling isolated, he now felt connected, a web of authenticity and compassion forming around him. Jake stepped out of the center, the moon high above illuminating the street. He felt lighter, the weight of our collective struggles dwindling into a memory. In facing his fears, he had forged a new path, not only for himself, but also for those who needed to reclaim their narratives. Months rolled by, the initial accusations fading like echoes into the background, the press cycle turning elsewhere. Yet Jake had emerged transformed, a beacon for others in pain. He took to organizing regular meetups, creating safe spaces to talk honestly about challenges facing the community. He understood the importance of truth. He had fought to reclaim his own voice, and in doing so found the gift of connection with others. What began as a storm had turned into an opportunity for growth, and now he shared his journey with pride. One evening, as he walked along the quiet streets, he reflected on how far he'd come. The rain started again, but he welcomed it, reminded of the storms that had shaped him. Instead of fear, he felt gratitude. Each drop became a reminder of resilience, a testament to the truth he now carried with him. Jake stood taller, ready to embrace whatever challenges lay ahead. He would never again wait in silence. Instead, he had learned to speak boldly, confront adversity, and lift others with his voice. And with every step forward, he knew he was not just living his truth, but celebrating it, an indomitable spirit thriving amidst life's chaos. Jake sat in the crowded lobby, glancing around at the bustling travelers trying to catch their breath between flights. Laughter and chatter filled the air, but he felt a strange heaviness in his chest, an unshakable sense of unease that something was about to change. He absent-mindedly stirred his lukewarm cup of coffee, lost in thought, barely registering the commotion around him. The lobby was a medley of colors, families reuniting, friends excitedly planning adventures, all while a muted television hung in the corner, blending into the background noise of the room. Just a moment ago, it had been a mindless distraction, but then the screen flickered dramatically, and the anchor's voice cut through the noise like a knife. Time froze. Jake's heart dropped and a cold wave of disbelief washed over him. Did they just say his name? Suddenly, everything felt unreal. He gripped the edge of the table, his fingers tightening around the smooth wood as he leaned closer to the television. The anchor continued, her tone urgent and tracking. Panic began to surge in his chest, a clenching, suffocating force. What could they possibly mean? He felt the weight of their words wrapping around him like chains. His entire life flashed through his mind, his job, his friends, the plans he had for the future. What would they all think? How could he go from an everyday guy to a headline in mere seconds? Images flashed across the screen, pictures of him at work, laughing with friends blurred and distorted. He seemed like such a nice guy, someone on the news said, their voice dripping with skepticism. The anchor nodded as if to reinforce a narrative that felt unfair and wrong. The room began to swirl around him. What had he done? He had always tried to do right by others, to foster trust and kindness. But in this moment, the concept of who he was began to fracture, the weight of public perception threatening to suffocate him. Jake's phone vibrated violently in his pocket, pulling him back to reality. He barely managed to pull it out, his hands shaking. The words felt like shards of glass cutting into him, each notification a piercing reminder of the chaos that had unfolded. He glanced around the lobby, and for the first time he felt the weight of every gaze on him, calculating and judgmental. People were whispering. They were already forming opinions, dissecting his character with the precision of a butcher's knife, and he was powerless to stop it. A wave of nausea rolled through him, choking off his air. He couldn't sit in this lobby any longer, so he stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He pushed through the glass doors, charging out into the rain-soaked street, where the cool droplets hit his skin like tiny needles. The storm mirrored the turmoil within. Each raindrop seemed to wash away the assurances of his normal life. He stumbled a few steps, struggling to gather his thoughts, searching for clarity as the world around him blurred into indistinct shapes. A familiar voice cut through the chaos. It was Sarah, his best friend. She stood under an awning, her expression a mix of concern and urgency. Without thinking, he dashed toward her, the urgency of the moment fueling his every step. She exclaimed, shaking her head in disbelief. He shouted, breathless with anxiety. "I didn't do anything." The words tumbled out, frenzied and raw. "Let's get somewhere safe," she urged, grabbing his arm and directing him toward a nearby cafe. Inside, the warmth enveloped him like a shield against the cold reality outside. The cafe buzzed with activity, but in that moment Jake felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. They found a small corner table where they could talk privately. "We need to figure this out," Sarah said firmly, her eyes steady on his. "You can't let this define who you are," he replied, desperation creeping into his voice. "Not everyone has," she responded, leaning closer. "You've built a life here, friends, family, people who know you. You need to reach out to them, share your truth." His mind raced, battling with the fear that clutched at him. What if his truth wasn't enough? What if no one believed him? But as he looked into Sarah's unwavering gaze, he felt a flicker of hope, a small ember igniting deep within him. "You're right," he finally conceded. They began to brainstorm how to communicate with everyone who mattered in his life. Right there in the cafe, surrounded by chatter and laughter, they drafted a statement, a personal account that would share his truth, explain what he stood for. "I am not what's being said," he typed, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "I care about my community." He felt better with every line they wrote, the act of vocalizing his truth transforming his fear into determination. Below the surface tumult, there was a growing confidence. This was a turning point. He would not let himself drown in this sea of accusations. As they finalized the statement, the rain lessened outside and sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the cafe as if to signify a new beginning. Sarah asked, her voice steady with purpose. "Let's do it," Jake replied, a rush of adrenaline coursing through him. With a simple click, they published it online, sending his words spiraling into the digital world. Immediately, his phone erupted with pings. People started sharing his message, sending notes of support. Each notification was a lifeline, a reminder that he wasn't alone. The following days felt surreal. Jake continued to engage with friends and loved ones, his words gaining traction. The support swelled around him like a warm blanket on a cold night. He shared his worries, his hopes, and even his fears with those who reached out. But there were still nights he lay awake, unable to shake the lingering doubt. He thought about the allegations, what they meant for his future, and how quickly one's life could unravel. The possibility that people would see him differently haunted him. The television news had carved a stark divide between who he was and how people perceived him. One evening, he found himself in a deep conversation with Sarah, who had been his rock through the turmoil. He asked, vulnerability lacing his tone. "It will take time, but it can. Focus on your integrity and your character. That's what will define you in the end, not what someone else says," she reminded him, pushing back a strand of hair that had fallen across her forehead. He nodded, a small flicker of hope igniting again. Maybe he could turn this around. Maybe he could show everyone who he truly was. And then came the day when he received an invitation to speak at a community meeting, a chance to share his story with the public face to face. People were talking about the situation, questioning it, and coming together in ways that felt almost organic. As he prepared for the meeting, Jake felt a mix of excitement and fear. This was his opportunity to reclaim his narrative, to confront the shadows that had been cast over him. On the day of the meeting, he stood outside the community center, his heart pounding in rhythm with the chatter of those gathering inside. He took a deep breath, grounding himself. This was his moment to step out of the silence. As he entered the room, he saw familiar faces, friends, neighbors, even a few strangers who had come to listen. He took a seat at the front, feeling the weight of their expectations settle on his shoulders. When it was his turn to speak, nerves threatened to overwhelm him, but he pushed them aside. "Thank you for being here," he began, scanning the crowd. As he spoke, trying to piece together his experiences, the atmosphere shifted. His vulnerability drew people in, and he could feel the empathy radiate from the room. He explained how he felt when he first heard the news and the fear that had consumed him. He spoke of the overwhelming support he had received, but also the lingering uncertainty that still plagued him. "This has been a hard journey," he admitted, his voice trembling slightly. The room erupted in applause, a wave of support crashing over him. In that moment, he realized that beneath the fear and uncertainty lay a community that had rallied around him, ready to support him in his truth. But just as he started to feel the warmth of that acceptance, a gasp coursed through the crowd. Jake turned to see a familiar face, someone he had never expected to see here. It was a colleague from his pharmacy, someone who had been absent during the turmoil, now stepping forward with uncertainty etched on their face. Their voice trailed off, and Jake felt the air around them shift, thickening with tension. Jake asked, his pulse quickening. "I just received a call from someone who claims to have evidence against you," they said, their voice barely above a whisper. The room fell silent, the atmosphere heavy with uncertainty. All eyes turned to Jake, the anticipation thick enough to cut through with a knife. In an instant, the sense of triumph he had felt morphed into a chilling dread, overshadowing the progress he had just made. He repeated slowly, the word tasting bitter on his tongue, the gravity of the situation crashing down on him. And as the whispers began to swirl around him again, the weight of uncertainty settled like a storm cloud hanging low. Jake felt his thoughts spinning out of control. Just when he thought he could see a way forward, the ground shifted beneath him, propelling him into the unknown once again. The fight wasn't over, it was far from finished. And as he stood frozen, questions raced through his mind. What did this mean for him? What came next?